I'm going to cover more of that. We're going to get Jim Tucker, written for some of the largest syndicated columns in newspapers, been in newspaper work for almost 50 years, writes for American Free Press. He is the original guy who 30-plus years ago began writing about the Bilderberg Group. Up until about 7 years ago, the media said he was insane and it didn't exist. Now Bilderberg has written articles and published reports bragging that they set up the European Union, the North American Union. Etienne Davignon gave interviews at the G20, the head of the Bilderberg Group. Politico now writes about how it's real and how it runs things, and sources, Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. Again, they've gone from saying it doesn't exist to existing. And Jim, sometimes 2, 3, 4 years before something happens, is able to predict what's going to happen. He said, 4 years ago, gas is going to go to $150 a barrel. Bilderberg says so within the next 3 years. It happened. He said 3 years ago they're going to pop the subprime mortgage and implode the derivatives crisis to bring in their world government. It happened 2 years later. He said George Bush is going to come out and endorse the Kyoto Protocol on global warming. Everybody laughed at him. A month later, Bush did it. Why? Because the Bilderberg Group is the 125 most powerful people in the world. They've got other steering meetings and things they engage in. That's all they do is fly around micromanaging everything. People say, well, why do they fly around? Well, the mafia doesn't talk over the telephone. They do it in person. They've already got their system and operation running. They just fine-tune things like a mafia commission meeting. And so joining us is Jim Tucker, and we carry his book at Infowars.com, by the way, on the Bilderberg Group. Excellent book. Jim Tucker, good to have you on.
My pleasure, as usual.
Okay, give us the latest on Bilderberg. You believe you found the location of it coming up?
Yes, in Vouliagmeni, Greece, which is concrete to concrete with Athens, at the can never pronounce the name of Astir Park Resort. They met there in 1993. They're going back this year, May 14 to 17.
Okay, have you talked to any of your sources? Do you know what's on the agenda this time?
Yes, two people involved in international finance believe that the Bilderbergs are going to celebrate, that is, celebrate the economic crisis, which they may have very well have helped generate for the purpose of creating more global power to international organizations like the IMF and World Bank, sort of makes them a global Treasury Department. And, of course, their regular agenda is always the same as far as evolving the United Nations into a world government, which to some extent it is now.
Well, Jim Tucker, I want to stop you right there. Now, please be very, very specific for the listeners. Okay, for the folks out there listening, be very, very specific.
Okay, specifically, I think the listeners are aware that we're in an economic crisis worldwide. The Bilderberg people may very well have created this crisis themselves for their own selfish purposes. They're going to exploit it for their own selfish purposes. It will give them more muscle to generate a type of world Treasury Department, another wing of the United Nations, to bring it still another significant step closer to a world government, which the UN has effectively become anyway with the now that NATO years ago, in fact, on the occasion of their 50th anniversary 10 years ago, NATO celebrated its role as the UN standing army. You could even read that in the Washington Post. There's two different paragraphs, one on page 1 and one deep inside on their NATO story, because the celebration of the 50th was in Washington, D.C. It was a big story locally and worldwide. And one paragraph, they celebrated the fact that the first time NATO forces fired a shot in anger, it was in Kosovo, not according to, as their charter dictates, in defense of Western Europe against the potential Soviet attack. Then, way down deep in the story on the side where the story had jumped, they quoted one of the heads of state as saying that, of course, NATO would only send its military to areas as directed by the UN. You put the two paragraphs together, and NATO for 10 years has been the standing army of the United Nations. It will go anywhere in the world on the orders of the UN Security Council. And, of course, they're also working on eliminating local currency. The dollar is to become the Mero as NAFTA expands throughout the Western Hemisphere and evolves into an American Union similar to the European Union.
Jim, stop right there for a moment. Let's walk through this for a second. I want to go back. Going back to almost 3 years ago, Bilderberg 2006. We're in the bar. I'm interviewing you and Daniel Estelin with your Bilderberg sources inside. Danny and you talk about how they're planning an engineered collapse of the subprime mortgage to bring the world to its knees so they could consolidate. Now we fast forward to the eve of a Bilderberg Group meeting in 2009, 3 years later. Specifically, your sources, the intel, it's confirmed by George Soros and others bragging that the oil crisis is contrived to lower the price to bankrupt their enemies. He also told a bunch of newspapers that, hey, I'm having a great crisis. This is the culmination of my life. We're getting all this power and control out of imploding the economy. So they're openly bragging that they love what's happening and that they helped engineer it. Specifically, though, Jim Tucker, you're saying Bilderberg is going to celebrate the fact that the crisis is bringing in their new world order.
Yes, that's according, as I said, to two people heavily involved in international finance and who are intimately aware of Bilderberg. I wish I could name the sources out loud, but for obvious reasons I cannot.
No, we understand. You're proving your sources are impeccable, Jim. I mean, we've gone from them saying Bilderberg didn't exist to them now having admitted it. What is it like to go from the point of this was denied, you were insane, you were schizophrenic, there was no such thing as a global elite, much less a Bilderberg group, with the media covering it up, to now it's getting more and more attention?
Well, it's been a process over the years. It was, I believe, in Helsinki maybe 13 years ago that we found out where Bilderberg was going to be situated, where they were going to meet and when, quite early that year, I think November or something. So we had an advanced story in the spotlight, the grandpappy of American Free Press, and our European readers, of which circulation is limited, of course, in Europe because of the high cost of postage and so forth. So one subscription is likely to be shared by 20 people. So our readers in Helsinki wrote back, this is all by snail mail, saying, should we alert the local media? And we said yes, and I should have thought about it years earlier. And when Bilderberg kids got off airplanes at the airport in Helsinki, heading for their helicopters and limousines that would take them to a resort about 30 miles out, they were stunned to see cameras flashing, reporters with padded, hot little fist screaming questions. And since then, the European media, broadcast, TV, radio, and newspapers, and then news magazines have been all over Bilderberg. I'm talking about major daily newspapers from London and Paris and elsewhere. Give page one heavy treatment. And they work very hard at it. They're widely known in Europe, but the blackout is still 100% in the United States, with the exception, of course, of American Free Press. And as you observed at the meeting in Chantilly a few years ago, the independent press, like the small newspaper that's independently owned in a small town, or independently owned radio station or TV station. We had quite a number of those people turn out for Bilderberg and Chantilly, but you'd never see the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, or either of our services because they have attended these meetings and took their oath of secrecy.
Jim, like you said, there's still almost a complete media blackout here in the United States, but we are starting to actually see a few articles about Bilderberg. But now they're saying, oh, we don't really run anything. And then Wikipedia deletes the Bilderberg account, and then they say it doesn't exist, just like they say New World Order doesn't exist because it's CIA run. And they also deleted the Bilderberg list from 2008 in Chantilly, saying that even though Bilderberg released that, they couldn't prove that was theirs, so it didn't exist either. So we have this crazy